Welcome back to this. I believe this to be episode 19 of Behind the Screen. Those of you who were here last week, I've turned the webcam off because I don't think it's really going to add anything to this stream. If you want it on, just tell me and I can, sort that out for you. Today's topic is keeping encounters entertaining on the tabletop. This is something that I put a lot of effort into doing. Really hope the pop filter is doing its thing with plosives and sibilants, because I believe firmly that if your tabletop encounters aren't interesting, then there's no real point to them. So really, today will be however long it is, however long it ends up being. Ideally, I'd like to run for an hour to an hour and a half, and then sign off and start getting ready for my game later and do the last few things around the house I need to do before leaving. Also, I mentioned, I'll repeat this at the end of the stream as well, but last week I mentioned that there would be no Vampire the Masquerade stream on Thursday. It would be on Wednesday instead because of my work schedule. That was incorrect. I discovered I'm also working Wednesday. So I'm just going to do a later Vampire stream on Thursday, or depending what time I get back, play some Portia, and then do Vampire on Friday. But as I said, I'll repeat that at the end of the stream as well for people who are late, who might be interested. I am still ill, as I've said. I will try to mute the mic when I feel a cough coming on. Sometimes you can't always feel a cough coming on. Sometimes, for whatever reason, I don't press the mute button. I don't depress it enough, and so the mic picks up the cough. I'll try and keep that under control. But I will apologise in advance for that. You might hear my mouse clicking. You probably hear me typing without any music to absorb the background ambience. There's nothing I can really do, but I just think the music might distract from what we're saying. Although, if people want, I can source some ambient music to play in the background. I know I have some stuff in mind that I know is fine to use on streams as long as it's properly credited. So I might do that anyway. I haven't decided yet. So down to business. The recap of my home game. Nothing really happened last week. I could probably pause the preview. The party just spent the entire session in a combat encounter, which is what made me think of doing this as a topic. With the Rusalka that they had encountered previously, I decided that I'd use the Rusalka as written this time rather than toning her down. Previously, I believe I lowered her health and her save DC, because the Rusalka I'm using from Kobold Press's wonderful resource, the Creature Codex, it doesn't have a traditional attack. It's primarily about grabbing someone and then drowning them, which is great for the illusion of danger, but the time it takes to actually drown in D&D, if you're only fighting one thing, it's really easy to help break someone out. But this time I leaned into her aspect of being able to cast spells at will, and most of the threat from the encounter actually came from the whirlpool that she kept summoning, and pulling people in, dealing damage to them, keeping them trapped in the water where she could easily grab them, suck out what air's left in their lungs, and try and drown them again. As I say, the entire session was the combat with the Rusalka, and then at the end of it, the one player and character, the cleric, who hadn't fought her before, got the killing blow, and time stopped, and only the monk who has seen the big bad before passed the saving throw, and again witnessed the Banshee coming through a tear in reality to claim the Rusalka. Unfortunately, this time the damage was so great that the Rusalka was dead by the time the Banshee got there, and so At last, the Rusalka has been vanquished. Which brings us to the end of the session. To this session, I anticipate they will at least get to Javik's estate. They'll probably try and provoke a fight with. No, that's uncharitable. They may unintentionally provoke a fight with the Koreds who are guarding the mirror cave in their efforts to enter the mirror cave. But equally, they could just ignore it and then get stuck on the riddle for a little bit. But I have actually I need to dig out the map of Javik's estate that I've previously used, because it is the same map, just slightly different skin for them to explore. And then we will see where they get to at the end of today's session. It looks like the cleric's not going to be with us, so that's unfortunate. We haven't actually had a session this year where everyone can attend, which, it's not ideal, but it's how life goes, and with such a large group, it's going to happen that not everyone's going to be able to make it. We are at a 6-person party now. So it's unfortunate, but as I say, it's going to happen. So, one second, I think there was something at the door. Just a promotional flyer. Nothing. I'm waiting on a package, but I don't know quite when it's going to arrive. It's just should arrive sometime soonish, based on previous experience. Anyway, so that was the recap. Very hurried. Nothing much happened. Just a fight and some of my thoughts about how the fight went and stuff. So onto the subject of today's video, stream, what have you. How to keep encounters entertaining at the tabletop. Now, if you're anything like me, well, let's know. So I have 2 players who know the rules quite well and do their own fair share of GMing. So keeping throwing stuff at them that they know about, like that they've read the stat blocks for or the fiction for, obviously is going to lead to a little, not intentional metagaming, but they're going to have a good idea of what to look out for and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that they will intentionally do it again. I'm not saying that they'll consciously do it, but it's possible that they might unintentionally, unconsciously use the knowledge that they already have about a creature to I need a clip for my headset cable to best it in battle. So the first obvious suggestion is use homebrew. Apparently I got caps lock at some point. Use a homebrew creature. Obvious example of this would be me using the Rusalka. This is something that's not in the monster manual. It's not in any Wizards published book. It's in Kobold Press's Creature Codex. I think it's the Creature Codex. It's one of the two. I will just check so that I'm not, spreading misinformation. Bear with me. It's the one book I can never remember the name of for whatever reason. I've said Tome of Foes before, which obviously that's Mordekainen's Tome of Beasts. Tome of Beasts. Creature Codex was the second book they released, I believe. Just realised I need to update my PDF library on my phone. I use my smartphone a lot to, Tome of Beasts. Sorry. That's where I have the Rusalka. Creature Codex was Cobalt Press's second monster book, more recent one. So use a homebrew creature. Example of this obviously being the usage of the Rusalka, something that I don't have any idea about. Certainly not the two who know the rules well, because they weren't players when the Rusalka first came around. And if I need to use another Rusalka, there is on our Monster a Day, if it's still a thing, a Rusalka there that I could use. And that one's more focused around actually hitting people and doing damage directly than trying to drown them. But on top of that, so you've got within that you've got two options. You've got used third-party creatures, and you've got use self-made creatures. And the between Xanathar's Guide to Everything with encounter building rules, encounter building guidelines, I should say, where it gives more of a discrete breakdown of appropriate challenge rating for party size and level, and information that's available in the Dungeon Masters Guild. And again, this is all through a 5th edition lens, because that is the game I'm running and can provide examples for, and is also the most relevant because it's the biggest. Not necessarily the best, but it is pretty good. It's very well known. A lot of people play it. So information for both Xanathar's Guide to Everything and from the Dungeon Masters Guild, which has a section on appropriate ACs, damage values to hit bonuses, and hit points, broken down by challenge rating. You should be able to make kind of mash all those values together to create something that is a suitable challenge for your player party that they won't have seen before. So an example of this is that at the end of level 5 of the level 5 quest line, the players when the players ended up in the Shadowfell. If anyone's been listening to this from the start, it was just like the session before I started streaming, so 18 weeks ago. Good lord, 18 weeks at this point to go 2 levels. Level and a half. Wow. Anyway, it's a slow game. Players thought they were going to be facing like a nobleman, and indeed used the nobleman rules for the first phase of the boss fight, but also his second form and the smaller creatures that were supporting him were entirely homebrewed, and were intended to act as foreshadowing for the creatures that the necromancer that the boss was working for would be when if the players decide to go after that necromancer, which I'm pretty sure they will, but if they don't, it's no worries. I've got some cool creatures. And these were a combination of these were made using the DMG values, CR appropriate values. I used the Xanathar stuff to give me a rough idea of what CR I wanted each creature to be, but I also used the Blooded concept from 4th edition, so after they were reduced to half health, they gained buffs, and they were heavily inspired by the Necromorphs from Dead Space, which, is one of my favorite. So I say it's one of my favorite games because it is, in terms of everything but the actual game. I find the gameplay boring, but I love the sound design, the art design, the setting, and the lore and everything about it, but the actual gameplay. So naturally, I wanted to incorporate the Necromorphs into my game somehow. And one of the players picked up on what they were pretty much straight away. I wasn't being shy about it, but they had some stuff that they could do that the players might not have seen before. I'm going to see if I can flash one up on screen, but I might not be able to, so bear with me. I got to find the right folder on my hard drive. Nope, I just want the JPEG or PNG or whatever it's saved as. Nope. Here we go. We'll go with this one. And then I guess it would be back to the editor, add a new window capture, rename it temp, and oh, what did I do? I done goofed. Well, that didn't work. Let's just remove that window capture and then try and get the actual window back. Properties. I am professional. Here we go. Let's try that again. Window capture. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Add new source. Of course, it might just be that. Yep, that's not working. So how else to do? Remove temp. That's full screen. And then for some reason I just can't select anything on my primary monitor. So what if I do it? You know what? Let's just remove that. No one wants to see that information. Final attempt to do this. I'm just going to do what I should have done from the start. Browse. You know, I might actually edit the video so that just in case anything is revealed in that bit where I was accidentally copying the wrong screen. So here we go. Yeah, so the Deathwalker clearly is an homage to the Necromorph. There we go. So you'll notice that it's labeled as challenge rating 1 because it wasn't supposed to be too terribly challenging, but the level that they were, that was an appropriate challenge rating. And then armor class and hit points decided by the DMG. Pretty much everything decided by the DMG. I copied the zombie stat block for the most part because I didn't see the point of reinventing the wheel. I gave it the driven by hunger ability, so it's reduced to half. It rolls an additional d4 for its null reaction damage. And the other creatures, one did an additional d4 poison damage on successful attacks when reduced to half or fewer. And I don't know why I'm trying to remember. I've got them right here. It does an additional d4 poison damage on its main attack, and the other one does an additional d6 damage on its main attack because that was a challenge rating 6 creature. So that's an example of a homebrew character. I took the zombie stat block and I altered it slightly to become more appropriate for challenge rating and theme. If I were to do this all over again, I'd perhaps on the null reaction. So the idea behind that is when the Death Walker gets hit, it just lunges forward and bites. It's not an attack of opportunity. It is just it's an instinctive bite attack that happens when it receives damage. When it's reduced below half, it does 2d4 plus 2 damage. The Death Tyrant, who was the boss, was inspired by Mixed Necromorphs and Tyrant from Resident Evil. So it does extra d6 damage as Bone Sword. I gave it a version of Great Weapon Master. I'm just going to remove that image now. We don't need it anymore. And again, I just started with the zombie stat block and bumped it up a little bit. So self-made creatures don't have to be reinventing the wheel. You can just use existing creatures and alter their stat block, which leads me neatly onto alter existing creatures. So an example of this would be, say, that actually a good example I'm going to be using anyway is that at this point, most of the hostile NPCs the players are going to be encountering will probably be orcs. So I'll take the orc stat block and mess with it for various encounters. Some of them will get the Undying Rage thing where they just drop to 1 if they would be reduced to 0. Some of them won't get that. Some of them may get a Blood Frenzy when they are reduced to half damage and either gain temporary hit points, deal extra damage, something like that. Some of them, the players know to expect to be werebears in disguise, acting as orcs. Some of them will be spellcasters. Some of them will be more of the Blades of Shargas. A more rogue type orc from Volo's Guide, which they've also encountered, and things like that. But altering existing creatures, I guess I'll summarize this as alter racial features. So maybe I'll be flicking through the book and I have a certain orc archetype in mind, and I'll be flicking through the book and find another monster that has a feature that looks cool. So I'll take it, I'll reskin it to fit an orc and apply that to the orc stat block. And again, things like racial, the dropping to 1 hit point instead of 0 and things like that would be a racial feature that could be added, altered in some way, removed entirely, that kind of thing. Or you can alter their attacks. So I do this quite a lot. If a stat block says the creature has a dagger and a sling, sometimes I'll go with it has a short sword and a sling, so it just does d6 slashing, I think, instead of d4 piercing or whatever a dagger does. It's just an easy way of increasing the threat of the monster because it can potentially deal more damage without severely increasing the combat rating of the creature, because it's still going to be squishy, it's still going to have few hit points. Its AC is going to be quite low, but it has the potential to do, say, 8 instead of 6 damage if it rolls maximum value, which at lower levels is not insignificant, and at higher levels, if you've got things working together, then obviously it all adds up quickly. This is also where if you wanted to add, if you're happy with the stat block as it was, but you wanted to add a buff or a debuff to an attack, you could do that. So go into the kobold example. Kobolds have slings, which just do a minimal amount of bludgeoning damage, but if you gave them, if you kind of doubled down on either the tinkering idea of kobolds as tinkerers, because in the fiction they are, or if you want to reinforce the dragon worshipping angle and they emulate dragons, could potentially add an elemental effect to their slings. So the sling could still do like the D4 or D6 bludgeoning damage, whatever it is, but then has the -10 to speed effect from Ray of Frost. Or depending on the level of the party, of course, you could just substitute their sling for a Ray of Frost and just have them throwing using a sling to cast it, or to quote unquote cast it. Oh, I think someone's made a mistake, chosen poorly, but thank you for choosing poorly. I realized that having my text at the left is not the best side to have that, so I'm just gonna move that across. Oh, apparently it's catching up on all my old followers. Well, that's interesting. Why is... weird. I hope it doesn't cycle through that every time. I guess no one has chosen poorly recently. So yes, you can alter attacks to replicate. That is quickly going to become annoying. I'm sorry to anyone who's listening to that. It's going to go through probably another 15 of those. And I don't know why. Oh, nope. That's the wrong one. I guess I can mute it. In case it happens again. So the text might still pop up, but it should be muted. For now. I'll give it a few minutes and then unmute it. Yeah, so if there's an attack you like on another creature, obviously you can substitute. You can just swap them out. If there are things that if you want attacks to have buffs and debuffs, totally go ahead and do it. Just to mix things up a little, throw odd combinations at the party that they haven't seen before. Something I'm totally going to start doing with when they fight, when they encounter more kind of, or less expendable orcs, is have maybe debuffs on the orc attacks for some of them, depending on the type of orc it is. So if the orc's got a hammer, kind of give them the strength saving throw against being knocked prone by the force of the blow, that kind of thing. Just to get the flavor of the creature across, and to make their positioning and identifying which targets to go after first more important than just I hit the orc. Which in a way kind of also ties in with alter stat blocks. So in D&D everything has a combat rating, and that's challenge rating, and that is determined to some extent by things like health and AC to hit values, general ability scores and saving throws and proficiencies and things like that. The easiest way to raise a combat rating is challenge rating, is just to increase AC and hit points. Doing this will make the fight longer, from experience. But if you are in a situation as I was a few weeks ago, where the players are just fighting a solo enemy. If you want the encounter to be... If the encounter should have weight to it and you want it to have meaning and not just be a chance to roll dice against something, increasing the hit points of the target obviously makes it seem more able to withstand punishment and therefore more important in a way to the game. I do believe the alert stopped triggering for whatever reason. That was weird. So in that example, I took I think it was the Deathlock stat block and just added like 50 hit points to it to account for the fact that it's going to be alone for the most part. And more importantly, I wanted it to be, because it did have minions, but they weren't terribly great. They were easily dispatched. So I wanted it to be able to like be the last one standing and have the hit points to look around and at the aftermath of the heroes doing what heroes do and kind of realize that it's alone and do stuff from there. So that's something you can do, like raise hit points. You can also use stat blocks to change the flavor of an encounter. So if, like with the orcs, players expect orcs to be huge and beefy and brawny and to hit hard, but you could turn that on its head and just swap the strength and dexterity values, and they're suddenly less brawny, but they're more lithe, and they're going to go higher in the initiative order. They're going to have weapons that probably deal less damage on the damage die, but maybe can multi-attack to make up for it. So like a dexterity-based orc's probably not going to be wielding a greatsword, but they might have 2 short swords or 2 hand axes and benefit from 2 attacks because of it, or things like that. If you want tanky enemy, if you want to make an enemy tankier, obviously increases its hit points and its AC. If you want it brawnier, probably strength and constitution should be increased. Spellcasters, obviously, if you just alter their spellcasting ability modifier, their spell save DC will go up an appropriate amount, and all of their saves against spells will probably increase because most spells require a mental ability saving throw of some kind. But it's just another way to reflavor an existing creature without it being left behind in the dust by player progression. So like zombies, kobolds, goblins, things like that aren't terribly high challenge rating, but if you tweak them within reason, you don't want a goblin with like 150 hit points, that unexplained 150 hit points. All changes should make sense within context, but kind of if you want things like that to be a threat, just alter their values accordingly. Like zombies are a good one because they're just animated by magic, so they can have realistically any number of hit points depending on the strength of the animating magic. Maybe a goblin is hopped up on some kind of drug that's increasing its resistance to pain and morale. And this is probably a good place to mention that not all hit point damage should be viewed as injury. It can be wear and tear on the armor. It can be more bruising than actual physical harm. It can be stamina running out or will to fight running out. So that's what all of that is, which then leads me happily, nicely, and 100% unplanned onto altering creature behavior. Behaviors, I guess. I'm going to just re-enable the audio on that alert while I'm thinking about it. Properties follows. Nope. There we go. Back to how it was. So, altering creature behavior. Yes. So a lot of encounters are generally completed under the assumption that they will end when the opponent is reduced to 0 hit points or fewer, obviously, and a kind of a fight to the death situation. And that's for the large part, fine. But a lot of creatures in Dungeons and Dragons are intelligent and won't necessarily fight to the death. They will have goals that they're trying to complete, and maybe they'll just run away as soon as their goal can no longer be completed. Or they will call for backup, as in the case of gods quite frequently do, in which case probably worth deciding how far away reinforcements are and just either introduce them at initiative count 20 to act at the initiative of the unit it's reinforcing, or just introduce it with the unit it's reinforcing but not do anything that turn, just have it arrive at the battlefield. And some creatures will surrender rather than be killed. Some creatures, as in the case of the Rusalka last week, realizing that they're beaten, will just go into a frenzy and try and take down as many people as they possibly can. Which, admittedly, is not very different from fighting to the death, but a sudden burst of aggression can throw the players for a loop. I should probably make a note of these suggestions. So we've got run away, call for reinforcements, burst of aggression. So that's assuming kind of like solo or a small number of opponents that aren't particularly working together. And they could do any number of other things as well. These are just the first three suggestions that popped into my head. Additionally, of course, if you are using more than one or more than a small number of creatures, they will have tactics. They will probably work together to a common cause. So then you've got things like flanking and diversions and target priority. Like, this is something that intelligent creatures in my campaign will start doing, because I have a lot of spellcasters, so they'll start kind of targeting the spellcasters as best they can, avoiding the 2 melee combatants, and go after the ranged people, the 3 melee combatants, and go after the 3 party members that function better at range, depending on how the party decides to play that day. But as I say, a lot of things are intelligent. They will quickly work out what the greatest threat is and go after it. This is also a good place where you can have creatures talking to each other. Certainly intelligent sapient creatures that have language, they can be talking to each other and kind of barking out orders in their own language, assuming that the players can't understand them. And then if the players can, then obviously that's information to their benefit. So it's definitely something to to consider, that they're not an intelligent creature is not always going to go after the biggest, meatiest target there. They'll probably go for a target that they feel they can kill and thus remove an obstacle to preventing their victory. And it could all obviously, combine any and all of these behaviors. So they may go for target priority, and if they are denied the ability to do so, they'll just go for full-out offensive and try and just cluster around whatever's in their way as a burst of aggression. Or they'll call for reinforcements, fight defensively until then, and then work with the newcomers to enact their aim. Also, forgot surrender. / capitulate. A game that handles this quite well is Chronicles of Darkness, where before each combat begins, there is a vocalization of the stated aims of each side of the combat, so that everyone is on the same page about what both sides, or what all sides want to get out of the fight. And quite often, there's probably not, well, in D&D, obviously, it's going to be you want to kill the monsters that are doing whatever they're doing, but sometimes it could just be you want information and you're just beating them down. At which point, there's obviously the implicit the implied statement that you will be trying to knock them out rather than kill them. and discussions about things like that. So definitely something to consider before, if you want to handle things like that, if you want to decide that you want to have a discussion about the aims of both sides before adjudicating an encounter or running an encounter. And then the last thing I can think of for today is to introduce temporary mechanics. And this is something that I've always done, interactive environments. So where there's something in the environment that players can mess with. Example of this would be players were fighting a corrupted treant, and the treant was pushing down trees to try and kill them, but it was also giving them cover. It's also where I would use the environmental quality effect things that we made on stream a few weeks ago with weather and the landscape playing a part in the environment. Modeling 3D space. This isn't something that usually comes up beyond elevation, but in the example of last week's game, the players were fighting around a deep pool, and so we were tracking not only the horizontal movement, but where they were in the depth in the pool itself, which became important for things like the whirlpool, because it determined how close they were to the vortex and things like that, and how far they had to swim up to break, to break the surface to breathe again. I would say this is something to do sparingly. It can add a lot of needless complexity to the game, but it worked really well, and the players seemed to really enjoy it. So I was happy with that. And then also, where's my mouse gone? There it is. This is also somewhere where it would be kind of enemy specific mechanics. So an example of this would be in the level 5 boss fight that they did against the Death Tyrant I mentioned earlier, because it has the potential to deal was Bone Greatsword 3d8 plus 3, 3d8 plus 5, 3d8 and 1d6 plus 5, so averaged out to what? Well over 20 damage per attack, and it makes 3 of those attacks per turn at plus 6 to hit. Well, plus 3 to hit, because I gave it Great Weapon, a modified Great Weapon Master. But at the capability of dishing out over 60 damage per attack, per turn, 20 per attack, I gave them the option to essentially dodge roll. So its attacks are quite slow and easy to predict, but if they hit you, it hurts really bad. But I gave them the potential to dodge roll out of the attack to reduce the damage. Now, if you're going to do something like this, do consider rogues get uncanny dodge as a reaction anyway. So the way I handled this was that the rogue player got the uncanny dodge reaction and one dodge roll reaction as well to reflect and to reflect that capability and to not nullify one of the core aspects of the rogue class. It could also have things like, as I'm going to do with the Javik fight, he's going to have lair actions available, so he's going to be able to teleport around and obviously do stuff in the lair itself. Actually, this is a good place to talk about just giving major NPCs their own legendary actions that they can maybe take once per turn. They can do one thing. If it's a low level, an important encounter, or obviously the higher challenge rating you get, then the more legendary actions they can do, following existing legendary action templates. And also you could probably get environment-specific mechanics in here as well. And again, this would be where the weather effects come in and things like that. Or if you're fighting in, say, a forge, if you get a creature onto a certain square, you can then activate part of the machinery to dump hot coals on them, that kind of thing. To simulate that not every fight's going to take place in a square room in perfect weather with nothing around. Like a grey box video game level. Just to mix things up. And that's all I can really think of for the moment. So to summarize, actually before I summarize, I will explain that I might return to this in the future with more complete examples, if I can think of any, because it's something that is very important to me, as anyone who's been watching these, following along, will have gathered by all the stuff I'm doing about weather mechanics for the combat encounters and exploration stuff. So I will return to this probably with more concrete examples, use that list, and then maybe design some quote-unquote entertaining encounters with chat's help, and maybe do like 1 point from each section, and make a few encounters on stream that way. So to summarize, for an entertaining encounter, you can possibly use a homebrew creature, whether that's something from a third-party publisher, Kobold Press, for example, or Reddit, or a creature that you've made using the DMG and Xanathar's Guide to Everything guidelines. Just take an existing creature and tweak it slightly to suit your purposes. Give it a racial feature, remove one of its racial features, change its attacks up slightly, change the damage type, change the riders, debuffs, buffs, whatever, or give it a different stat block to increase its chances of staying around in combat. Change its behavior up. Don't just have everything fight to the death. Things will run away. Things will surrender. Things will call for backup. Things will just go down swinging as hard as they possibly can. And if they're not fighting independently, then things like flanking, diversionary tactics, target priority will come into play. And always, of course, remember that environments are places where things happen in. So that they'll be interactive. There'll be stuff that players can do in the environment to affect it. There was stuff that opponents can do in their environment to affect the environment to their benefit. Modeling 3D space, as I discussed, was difficult but rewarding. So if you feel like that, totally go for it. And then occasionally give an enemy or an environment specific mechanics that players probably won't encounter anywhere else, just for fun. And that way, if they are temporary, then there's nothing that they can. That there is no there's no penalty for forgetting to use it. So, if it's not if it's not adding to the game in any way, if the players aren't paying attention to it, then it's fine. You've lost nothing by using it. But that's really all for now. I know I said at the start of the stream I was going to repeat something, but I can't remember what I was going to repeat. So, next week. Thursday would probably be a later stream. If it is, it will be my time at Porsche. If it's too much of a late stream, I should say, so about 3:30 my time, it'll be my time at Porsche. If it's about 3 o'clock my time, I should be able to get home for. Probably more Vampire. Friday I'm fine. I'm not working, so probably more Porsche or Vampire, whichever one isn't played on Thursday will probably get played then. I will be back in theory next Monday for another behind the screen stream. I have no idea what topic that will be on. probably just wait and see what occurs to me half an hour before the stream starts. Or just do another stream on InGun and start building the history of that world. Other than that, if you've enjoyed this, of course, please do hit follow on Twitch, Comrade Bubbles, or subscribe on YouTube, Comrade Bubbles. If you're watching this on Twitch, the whole stream will be up on YouTube afterwards. I should have enough time to upload it today before heading out to my game later. Even with editing it, blurring some stuff out. So can't believe I did that. And as usual, I'll be around in chat for a few minutes after the recording ends. If anyone's got any questions or anything like that, I'll happily answer them. I generally tweet on Twitter. Where else would I tweet? At Comrade Bubbles again when I'm going live. And I'm always happy to answer questions there as well. Or on YouTube comments if you feel like you leaving a comment. I know a lot of streamers don't, but I am small and I can afford to do that. So that's it for now. I hope you had a good time. I'll be back later this week if you're around. If not, I hope you have a good one.